Captain Steve Thomas, also known as Varmint, is our next speaker.
My name is Captain Steve Thomas from, also go by Varmint, 74th Fighter Squadron, Pope Air Force Base, North Carolina, Flying Tigers, and we are currently, as he said, using the Rustic 3-3 call sign, or Rustic call sign and Rustic 3-3 at the time. Give you a quick background. I've been in a squadron flying the A-10 now for about 2.5 years. Just went through the forward air control upgrade about 8 months ago. I'm trying to do as much practice with that as I can. So they sent me out here to talk about what we're doing these days right now with the 74th. I know it says in the thing, mostly I'm going to be talking about Afghanistan and Iraq. I'm going to pretty much be pushing it to Afghanistan because that's what I know. I was there last summer, and even though we didn't fly any actual FAC sorties then, also talking to other weapons officers who were at the beginning of Afghanistan, did take notes, were flying the actual FAC missions out there. So I'm going to talk the best I can from unclassified notes that I've read, comparing those to his personal notes that he made of his sorties, and giving you a perspective on that, as well as then what we saw last summer. Again, first of all, I'm just going to give you a kind of a background what we're doing these days at 74th. I know it's different all around, even the A-10 community, let alone the rest of the CAF. But just kind of what we're doing for our training to be a FAC, how we're maintaining those currencies, so on. I'm going to talk about, just real briefly, I know we've already talked about the targeting pod, laser-guided bombs, things like that throughout the day. I know several of you are probably well-versed in what the targeting pod is and its basic capabilities, but I'm just going to go into that real quickly for those who aren't, and just kind of, you can kind of see right off the bat just with its capabilities how it can revolutionize and has revolutionized being able to FAC, the ways it has done that. I'm going to talk about OEF, Operation Anaconda, and that's, again, based upon notes of 74th pilot back in 2002 that flew those, and then talk about OEF 2005 that our squadron was part of with that. There you go, real picture down there of us in Afghanistan. You kind of see the basic outlay of the country there, which we'll talk about more later on and how that affects the fighting out there. Very rugged, very high mountains, and further off to the northeast, those particular mountains there, I believe, had a ceiling of about, or a peak of about 15,000 feet. Further up north went even higher, to where you could be flying along at 19,000 feet and see mountains above you further north. So it kind of gives you an idea of the basic layout of Afghanistan and some of the problems it entails. First of all, we call our airstrike control upgrade. In our squadron, it's only a 4-ride upgrade, and really that's based upon a lot of things. It used to be that in the A-10 community, going through basic training for the A-10, that you would get 8 to 10 different rides just for FACing. That was taken out of that curriculum, but we haven't yet upgraded this curriculum yet. So 4 rides is kind of a tough, steep learning curve. So most of the young guys like myself actually ends up being about 8 to 10 rides once we're done hooking them and having to redo them, get better at it. It's often used as a precursor to the flight lead upgrades. Make sure guys are capable of going out there, thinking tactically, employing by themselves before sticking them with the wingman to go out there with as well. We're doing a lot less now for a lot of reasons. First of all, the different arenas, theaters we're in right now aren't requiring FACs. So instead, we're using all that training just to develop our CAS techniques and tactics more. The other thing is we're all required to go to a joint firepower course at Nellis Air Force Base before we can do that. When I graduated even 2.5 years ago from the A-10 school, we all went to JFC right off the bat in preparation for this. Now it's something the squadrons have to handpick who they want to send through the airstrike control upgrade to pay to send them to the JFC before they can go through. So that's another reason we're not putting as many people through. Also, they've increased the different currency things. It used to be once you were a FAC, and that was it. Now you got to maintain the certain currencies, otherwise you have to go through, same with the instructors, just to get your currency back. So we maintain a lot fewer people in the currency of the FAC at the time, Air FAC. Currency is based upon controls given, and really what we're used as a lot of times right now, just around North Carolina, is really a training tool. There's a lot of airframes around there, the F-16 Wild Weasels out of Shaw, who are multi-role. They need to be as good as they can in all these different roles. The Hornets out there, the 15E Strike Eagles, and a lot of times they don't get to go out and practice CAS as much as we do on a daily basis. So we get phone calls all the time from these different units, kind of wanting us to go out there, give them AO updates, pass them 9 lines, give them talk-ons, those sorts of things that they don't see on a regular basis, and that we practice a lot more. And so really that's what I've been used as since I've become a FAC. Obviously not being used in OEF as such. Is really as a training tool for other assets out there on how to FAC and how to CAS as well. Talking real briefly about the targeting pod, there you see a couple views of it right up here and right down here. without getting into specifics on that, really just the way it's kind of been able to revolutionize FACing is we've got a lot of different capabilities with it. First of all, coordinates. It's a lot easier for us to get coordinates to pass on to the guys on the ground when they're looking for something in particular. Also for marking, we have a laser. I know Stan was talking about the laser guided bombs earlier. This is what we use to guide those in as well. We also can use it with an infrared pointer that we can see under NVGs and gives us a better chance of seeing BDA. A lot of times when a bomb goes off by a target, automatically call it a hit, and yet when the smoke clears, it's still rolling. Targeting pod really gives you a good idea, either day or night, using the IR or just the camera in daytime to see that. Limitations on it, though, as you might expect, especially being a single-seat fighter, it's just a face magnet. A lot of times you become too dependent on the new technology. You're always facing here, when if you just get your nuggets out the cockpit, you can really get a lot of things done quicker. Same time, it really is a great tool in a lot of ways, and we'll talk about that. Also, just movement away from the basics. Like I said, the other day I was on a training mission, fairly out of currency with the targeting pod. I was trying to factor some different fighters, but I was so in tune to having this thing on my jet that I was trying to use it too much and really just taking way too much time and not doing the basics I should have been doing to do the FACing correctly. Operation Enduring Freedom. Early ops in Afghanistan, there were a lot of FAC missions, fragged. That's what we had right off the bat. Everyone saw we had the trade centers come down. It wasn't very long. We had guys attacking in there, especially around Operation Anaconda, which is a term we'll talk about a little bit more, but I know a lot of people know about that. What we had was a lot of different services, Navy, Marines, Air Force, all flying into the same chunks of airspace, dropping on different targets through different command and control, and it was kind of an Old West type of mentality, I guess. Saw that kind of early on and started sending FACs in. Not just A-10 FACs. I know, I believe some Strike Eagles were used as FACs early on as well, but just to give some sort of, mostly deconfliction really, and to fill ABCCC gaps again for all those different aircraft ingressing and egressing out of the areas. Also to ID targets of opportunity. Like I talked about the targeting pod, probably would have been a lot easier then, and we'll talk about one of the troubles of not having it early on there. So it's a lot tougher, especially at night, to find these targets of or to ID these targets of opportunity. It's a lot tougher in the Afghanistan scenario, which we'll talk about, to find these targets of opportunity. They're not tanks driving down roads. They're not these big giant targets you see, Scud missile pads. They're individuals driving just regular trucks, regular motorcycles along roads, and 99% of the time they're probably friendly. And so from the air, it's really tough, if not impossible, to ID these. So that's why we need the guys on the ground to do that. Operation Anaconda, these were going off based off the notes. I was here for 2005, Afghanistan. This was going back to the very beginning of it, Operation Anaconda, just to give you a background on that. These were a couple of fact sorties I picked out from one instructor's notes just to talked about a lot of different things having to do with FACing on there. Just to give you a background, Operation Anaconda, again, it's one of the first battles of Afghanistan up, and it really probably the most profound event of it is up on the mountain of Takur Gar, also known as Roberts Ridge there, where one Navy SEAL was killed. Guys were inserted to try to rescue him. Several more were killed. And in fact, on the wall I saw right outside the room here, there's a wall of outstanding enlisted Air Force throughout times. Tech Sergeant Chapman and Senior Airman Cunningham, Combat Controller, and PJ were both killed during that battle on that peak. And that's what we'll talk about here. That's that fight, if anyone has heard about that, trying to piece together. This is the same time frame, same days that these missions are being flown on right here. This particular mission is a two-ship FAC going in there. Really is what we've pretty much seen. I think as far as A-10s are concerned, I believe CAF-wide pretty much for the last decade or so. The old days of sending, we were talking about being naked out there by yourself. Not so much anymore. I think it's pretty much the standard now, at least in the hog community, going out as two ships. You got someone to watch your back a little bit more. It's just extra mutual support out there. And that's how they went out. They went out as a two-ship FAC sortie. This particular sortie took them about 12.5 hours airborne, several refuelings. They were first brought to the area, say right there, for the Battle of Takur Gar. They were used to coordinate the deconfliction. All they heard when they first got on there was the AC-130 that was escorting helos out of the area with 8 KIA. And that was, of course, the famous battle there on Roberts Ridge. That was where the 8 KIA up there that were being escorted out of the area. So they were first being used there in the area, just trying to deconflict between all the strikers coming in to work casts, as well as getting those helos out of there. As soon as they got that done, their next mission was just to go work with all the different JTACs on the ground. Early Afghanistan, we just went in there trying to root out as many Taliban as we could, and most of the fighting occurred right in this one area around where Roberts Ridge, Operation Anaconda, the largest operation in Afghanistan, took place. They were sent over to work CAS in the AO. And they were able to do a lot of good things, but they also learned a lot of things that are just lessons relearned over and over and over of problems they had there, of CAS versus time-sensitive targeting. No, Mr. Wickham earlier, I believe it was him, was talking about the frag pattern on a B-52 carpet bombing. 1 click by 2 clicks wide. It's a large area of destruction there. What they had there working at the time pretty much was you had CAS arena, just working directly with the guys on the ground, and you also had time-sensitive targets, guys leaving, knowing what they were going to strike, not talking to anyone, striking and coming back. In this one particular instance, Rustic was out there and got the call that there's a B-52 inbound, and went and found him on the radios, wanted to know what he was doing coming into his AO, make sure they had deconfliction. What it was, he was coming in to hit a time-sensitive target that just so happened was within 1 click of the JTACs that Rustic was working with, and was on a perfect perpendicular heading to where the edge of his rope of bombs would have been very, very close to the friendlies if it were perfect right on. So right away, what he had to do was just deconflict the rest of the airspace, get the B-52 to do a 360, come in from parallel heading to make sure we got the bombs down within a click of the friendlies there without killing them. So first of all, they were able to see that right off the bat that was probably going to be a problem, and it was a problem in early Afghanistan, of just deconfliction of the different types of missions going out there, not always talking to each other because of the lack of command and control going on. Again, later on that night, same thing. He was actually flying along. This is another case for the 2-ship FAC, and his number 2 told him to take evasive action, had seen an aircraft miss him nearby. What had happened was a set of F-18s went out there with a particular target, not giving any other frequencies to talk to them on. One of the F-18s dove through his altitude stack, not knowing he was there, and it was a very near miss there as they were going to attack their target. So again, another reason why they were trying to get the FACs out there, just with all these different airframes there in the same piece of airspace, hitting different targets, not talking to the same people, really caused a lot of trouble there. And also compounded a problem that I know that was spoken about earlier, just the difference between the regular Army and SOF not always talking to each other. Same with this, the time-sensitive target, CAS, not always talking to each other, kind of on different wavelengths, but big sky, small plane theory doesn't always work the way it should. They were able on the same mission, though. They were talking to JTACs on the ground that were taking a lot of fire from several different arty positions and mortar positions around the mountainside. At the time, the Rustics didn't have targeting pods on board yet, so they were just using, for any type of ID, they're trying to use their IR Maverick missiles, which weren't working so well. So what they were using was basically just GPS coordinates they were getting from the ground guys, rolling in, using the old trusted Willie Pete's, throwing those down there, getting good marks, and then rolling in F-15s and F-15s on the targets. They were able to neutralize several enemy mortar and arty positions, bed those guys down for the night, and press on to try to find target or ID targets of opportunity there. This is where we see one of the big problems of the targets of opportunity in this type of scenario. We've talked about all day, it's come up over and over about what really happens isn't always what happens in the paper. And I think you see that every day on the news. We talk about a few weeks ago, several hundred Taliban killed in action, and that kind of made the bottom corner of Fox News for a few hours. But then one troop is killed by friendly fire, which is obviously we never want to happen, always try to work against. And that's top news straight across the board for several days. So the same principles apply here. They ID'd what they thought was an enemy convoy without any way of having a guy on the ground sit there, look at it, weren't able to engage it, had to press home. So again, you see different war now with the mass media pushing on to where as an air fact, you're really limited as to what you are able to call people in on unless you know beyond a shadow of doubt that everyone in this chunk of airspace is enemy. So it makes it a lot tougher on those guys. Another reason why we just don't have the missions out there right now. Second night, they went out again. pressed out as a two-ship again working as cast deconfliction there. They were able to get eyes onto a time-sensitive target they were called to. Supposedly there was 200 to 300 guys that were all massing in a valley to push north on friendly positions. One thing he talks about in his notes is the time-honored tradition of reading your map. He wasn't doing that very well. It was at nighttime. He was really task saturated, so he's really just trying to follow all the GPS and INS stuff in his cockpit, using his HUD more than he should have been there, and depending upon the green stuff, as we call it. And for a good 10 to 15 minutes, couldn't get his eyes on the correct valley for that. He said he pulled out his map, looked at it, found the valley where it was, rolled in with some Willie Pete's, and then able to bring in some other aircraft, drop the bombs in there, cleared them in, Type 2 control, shot himself, or shot his 30 millimeter in the several strafing runs, he and his wingman. By the end of the night, they were told 200 to 300 ACM as well as several vehicles killed in the open valley there. It's also a rather famous valley, or a battle I found in several different places while I was trying to study for this, right there, that the Rustics were used in there. No one was happier than that. Kind of a not funny story. He was talking about on the way out there, usually his tanker crews pretty laid back. You know, they'd give him the gas, say happy hunting, whatever. Well, he ran upon these guys this night with their New York accents who were a little more pumped up than that, a little more vulgar, and wanted them to get out there and get the job done. They were actually from New Jersey Guard, KC-135 guys who had a lot of bros and family members and friends that were killed as firefighters and policemen in the World Trade Center. They wanted something to get done. So it made these guys real happy when they were able to go refuel after this and getting all the BDA by the end of the night to let them know that, and the tanker crew was sure happy about that. Lessons learned, as far as really being able to look at it from a fact standpoint, time-sensitive targeting versus cast. They weren't even on the same frequencies, so even though we had a FAC out there trying to deconflict for the different cast assets, still a problem trying to talk to other assets cruising in there not using the same frequencies, and a lot of deconfliction issues as we talked about as far as with the bombs and the friendlies on the ground, as well as guys diving through their altitude themselves on that one. Also little vision of location of friendlies. When they get in these time-sensitive targetings, like we talked about, the B-52, they knew the targets were there, so they told them to push on this side of the house with the B-52s. Unfortunately, they didn't talk to the cast side of the house to know where those JTACs were on the ground, and so Rustic was in real time able to figure that out, talk to them on frequency, and get it coordinated as a fact to make sure that those bombs hit where they were supposed to, kill the enemy while also maintaining the friendlies were safe on that. Again, technology can't always compare with time-proven techniques. Talked about the targeting pod and really kind of basically what it can do. I can't get into real specifics on it, but it does a lot of great things, and it would have done a lot better things had he had them there, but it can't always compare, as we talked about, with just the time-honored Willie Pete's and a map, plotting it on the map, rolling in, throwing down the Willie Pete's, getting eyes on, and dropping in. And really, when it boiled down to it, early Afghanistan, that's what was being used, and a lot of the other techniques weren't being used as well. Also, positive idea must. A-10s needed targeting pods. We didn't have them. We found that one convoy with a Maverick missile, really tough to find. I know a lot of the other airframes had the technology on board at the time. We didn't, and it definitely would have helped the Rustic early on in those battles. Flying Tigers and OEF last summer. We went there last May through late September. Ended up being about a 5-month tour for us. There were actually no fragged FAC missions I talked to. There's a lot of reasons for this. No concentration of force. Never was really at any time a lot of aircraft airborne for one particular mission because we never knew where the mission was going to be. What you have there, just to lay it out, is you have very rocky terrain, as I spoke of earlier. So what that really means is you don't have a lot of large forces going around. What you see on a daily basis, you're going out there to fly escort for these convoys of 10 to 20 Humvees, a lot of times carrying around the dudes with long beards, tattoos, no last names, who are just going village to village trying to pretty much show a presence, foreign relations, those kinds of things. And you're up above, and it can get really boring. There's sometimes 2 or 3 weeks where no one in your squadron will do a thing other than just go fly right above. Still gives you a good feeling when they let you know that they're happy to have you up there. But it's still also fun to squeeze the trigger or hit that pickle button. And so but that's what you do often for weeks on end, is just you're there for a presence. And then on the course of 2 days, you'll have 18 guys come back, all have shot, you'll have jets at Winchester. It's just all drought or flood out there in Afghanistan right now. So that's really what we're doing a lot of times, just following around these small teams, like Stan's was talking about, or like these little teams of foreign fighters as well, English SAS, so forth. Such sporadic violence, no concentration of force. Like we talked about, you have to have positive identification of the enemy. Can't really do that so much from the air, as well as the JTACs on the ground. So really an AirFAC without any other guys up in the air and without being able to do that positive ID themselves, not really needed. However, at the same time, repeatedly on the airstrike request forms, every single time they're requesting guys who are FAC A qualified for in the event that they can't call in that final control, that they've got a guy in the air who they're confident can do that and are able to do that. And day after day over there, the same skills we learn in the FAC upgrade are the same skills we're using over there in Afghanistan right now. So one particular mission I'll talk about because it really talked a lot about earlier what Mr. Knisley was talking about as far as redirecting that ARTI. And this is really what happened on this sortie. 2 A-10s went out near Kaus, Afghanistan, which is down towards kind of like the central eastern border of Afghanistan. Early on, a lot of trouble over on that side, near the border there. What had been happening all day long was there were Army positions all along that had been taking mortar and ARTI fire, and actually had 2 KIA, and they were trying to fire their ARTI back in the same position. We were just talking about in the last brief the equipment that is able to get the 10-digit coordinates for where that ARTI is coming from. Well, the Army had those coordinates, and they kept pounding those coordinates over and over, but they were still getting shelled, and they needed some extra help from that. So 2 of our fighters up there, both FAC qualified, were flying there, unable to shoot just because of ROE, political situation at the time, which is also a frustrating fact, but I know all y'all can understand that one. They weren't able to shoot at the time, but they were able to help at the same time. And this is where I really want to talk about that targeting pod and how it really helped out in this particular instance. They had the coordinates that they thought the ARTI was coming from, but they couldn't get their eyes on it, and they couldn't quite get the ARTI on it. So what our guys were able to do, even though they weren't able to shoot or really affect the battlefield, is throw their targeting pod out there. Because as accurate as those coordinates can be, in this case they were off by not very much, but just enough to where that ARTI fire wasn't helping. So with the targeting pod, they were able to, our fighters were able to get their eyes onto those ARTI positions, get better coordinates to the Army ARTI, the U.S. ARTI, and they were able to neutralize those guys rather quickly after that, just using the targeting pods there. So one way that, and we're also at that time also to be able to pass the good guys real-time VDA for sure, other than in the night before we just kind of had to be guessed upon the fact that they weren't firing anymore, whatever, good hits, I guess. This time they had eyes on, good hits, ARTI fire stop, able to verbally correct with the coordinates and also with that IR pointer we were talking about off the targeting pod to make sure that the good guys had the correct coordinates that they were firing at. So really what I talk about rather quickly was 74th background training, just kind of the way we're training these days and what we're using our training for as FACs, as the Rustics out there. Real quick on the targeting pod, just to give you kind of an idea of how that we're using that as a FAC, how we're able to use that in Afghanistan, and it's being used in Iraq daily too by the other airframes out there. OEF real quick, just Operation Afghanistan, or Operation Anaconda. What the Rustics were actually doing out there. The particular pilot was a 74th pilot, Rustic, who was flying those missions there that were very pivotal there for Operation Anaconda. As well as just real basically our summer last year, what's going on in Afghanistan on the whole, and just give you an idea on that. Are there any questions for me as a local Rustic with flying with the A-10s or Afghanistan as a whole, as much as I can answer? Mm-hmm.
Have any thoughts about our enlisted friends working on the ground now as controllers?
Any thoughts on the enlisted guys working on the controllers now, or as controllers on the ground? More or less, for the vast majority of them, absolutely excellent. I know a lot of those guys went through the same joint firepower course with them out there in Nellis. Highly trained guys. They got a lot of really neat gadgets. And really, those are most of the guys we worked with in Afghanistan. Some of the same guys, airmen who went through the JFC with me, I actually ran into in Afghanistan and unknowingly had worked with them. They were on their way home, rotating home through Bagram, and I had unknowingly at the time worked with them out there in the areas. Excellent. So really, really good, I think.
Great motto that you have up there.
Oh, thanks. Yes.
When you guys are out of faculty, can you generate coordinates from your Lightning target pod to pass to other aircraft that have JDAMs or IM capable bombs, so you guys can get good enough coordinates for that?
No. I mean, we can get really tight coordinates with our targeting pod, but I'm not sure. And you know what? I can't even answer that completely truthfully. We may be able to do that. We have not had to do that yet at all. And I'm just not sure that those coordinates are good enough to pass on to you. Honestly, I'm not sure about that. We haven't had to work with any JDAMs yet just because, well, they haven't really been in theater in Afghanistan at all. And plus, most of the time, just about everything we did over there, we shot over 30,000 rounds of our 30mm gun, and I could count pretty much on 2 hands and my feet the amount of bombs we dropped over the summer. And really the reason that is what we're talking about is you're flying overhead, you got a convoy cruising along, nothing's going on. Next thing you know, they're getting shot at from 45, 50 meters away, and we're having to throw down the most precise thing we have. You know, but I'm not really sure.
Are the Predators taking much of your mission?
Not really. Well, definitely is the FAC, I guess. You know, I'm not really sure how much they work. I'm not a big fan of them. I almost ran into one of them myself in Afghanistan. But they definitely work very well, and you're probably right, they probably are taking the place of the FAC because, as I said, there's just so much stuff going on in Afghanistan that in a lot of places you'll have Predators where you can't have a set of fighters. And so they might be doing the convoy escort or doing other things, and then once things hit the fan, they need us to press to the area. We are getting 9 lines AO updates from a guy sitting behind a desk halfway around the world based on that. Anything else for me before we pass on to our F-16 Bubba's? All right, thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry, I took that.
Thanks.
Hope that was incredible.